So something that we talked about with Jeff Osdemore that speaks to what you just brought up is that there are the moments that are really great that obviously like when you see him in the lot, it's like bang, 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 right? And that's part of why like that experience is so impressive, but it's not that way in the show. In the show, it's more sort of spread out. And what you're talking about is when does it happen? When are you hitting those peaks? How much time goes by? And Osdemore talked a lot about that, about through time. Those words on the judging sheet are really important. And in my opinion, that's probably, a real key, that's probably where a lot of the puzzle solving lies with groups, is not exactly knowing or trying to figure out their way of managing that time.
Yeah. Especially like when you spread it across all sections too. And like, because everyone's trying to find the balance for each one of their sections. And sometimes there can be like, rubs if like one person wants more than the other person, but making sure that every single section has their time and their place, has their moments, especially like in a competitive nature where we're kind of judging this like art, right? So it's like, it's not exactly like you can just do whatever you want sort of deal. So it's like there is like a structure. There should be a structure in a sense, but also trying to find that. And that's kind of what I mean when I say like collaboratively, like trying to figure that out, working with your team, with having the design team work with their own selves and making sure that they're all on the same page of allotting the correct amount of time for the correct flow for each specific show, because each show is so different, and it's like, trying to find that perfect blend and balance. But you're totally right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
2020 rolls around.
Yes.
And
2020 Pulse.
2020
Pulse.
2020 Pulse.
Yeah.
Remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the summer too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And having all that taken away.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Yeah, like let's just start with Pulse, because I feel like coming off of 19, we knew we felt so good about it. We're like, there maybe could have been things that could have been better, right? It's always just like you think back, you're like, did we do everything right? Not yet. So there's more to go, And so the next year, you kind of like hit those things from the beginning. You say them out loud, you verbalize them, and then you just start going after them. And so I think 20 was the first time I feel like where the full ensemble was super like bought in to like the same, just like sort of just like family and just sort of like the same energy. We were all like super down from the get-go. It was the first time where it was just like we finally got everyone, just all sections. And we had so much communication happening between all the section leaders, us with like John and things like that. We were all so on the same page. And so like the process of putting that show together just kind of felt so like just kind of happened and everything worked. Everything felt really good the whole time. And so as we were working hard that season, like that's what we were going for. Like we came out banging. We wanted to just keep that going. We knew there was more work to be done. And I think once that all stopped, it's actually kind of the funny thing, like a funny story about 2020 too, or I guess 2020 as well, is that like that last show, what was it? I think
Temescal Canyon.
Yeah, Temescal Canyon. And so the weekend before that, I think I actually missed because I think there were Blue Devils callbacks. And I think I had just made the line and whatnot. And we just kind of like drummed, which also had me super excited for Blue Devils. That quad line was going to be incredible. Loved the guys. Like I was so excited for it. I felt like we were finally like that was the first year we brought back the 5 quad players. And I remember that being a huge hype. I was really pushing for it. And so we finally had that going. I missed the weekend of Pulse in which they added the last bit of show to finish out the closer. And so I remember like coming back the next weekend, it was that show weekend. And so that Friday night, like I knew all the music already. Pretty much Friday, I had to learn the drill. I think Saturday we rehearsed it a bit. I don't remember if that was a show day, if it was Saturday or Sunday. But pretty much what I do remember...
It was Sunday because it was during the day.
Okay, yeah.
Because I took video of that.
Yeah, you took video. Yeah, you took the video of that. Yes, that's the one. And so like I think that Saturday we just kind of repped it, but I don't think we did a full run that day. So the show comes around and that's my first time like doing a full run of the entire show is the show. And like having the parts, I was like, I know the quad motions. Like I was like, I know the dots, never quite done it in context yet, but like So I like kind of just doing it, and then like felt good about it. I was like, okay, like that's all fine. We're all like, this is fine for now. Things happen in the run, but like we'll get next week. And then there was no next week.
Right.
And so, yeah. And I remember being at school when like all that stuff happened. I was so confused, just like, what do you mean? Like all of it? Just like that? Okay, for sure. You know,
Like it's over. Also, stay away from each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
I remember thinking, okay, well, they're going to have the San Bernardino regional because that was like the next big show. And it's like, and then they got canceled. I'm like,
yeah.
Really?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it was one of those things that felt surreal. Just kind of was like, it was also at the time where we all thought it was going to be 2 weeks or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
Who would have known the whole season and then next was going to be gone?
Yeah. Everyone was on the same page of not knowing.
Yeah.
Same page of just like obliviousness. I guess.
You know what nobody ever talks about? 2020 Pulse was the beginning of the streak that people don't even realize is going on now.
Mm-hmm.
Pulse has been undefeated at every show since 2020.
Yeah. It's even wild
Let
when
me
you
knock
say
on
it.
wood. I don't want to be the guy that jinx it.
You totally
but yeah.
did just jinx
No,
it.
no. Hey, I hope John and Ian don't see that. So, yeah.
It's funny because it is one of those things. It's like I feel okay with saying it because I don't find it a luck thing either.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's totally deserved, man.
Yeah,
You guys
I was
have
gonna
been,
say
like-
it's felt very confident in the way that we go about and like the intention of doing that. And it's also like, will it last forever? Probably not. It's not intended to, but like we're all that I really think about personally is just like, all right, next. Let's come out next. Honestly, everyone else doesn't really matter right now. At least in terms of like, especially being on the staff side and like doing that, but we'll probably get more into that. But just kind of like honing in and just being like, all right, like what do these guys got to do next? Like, how can we be better? How can we be the best ones coming out the gate? How can we put in that work, you know, for ourselves? And so, yeah, and coming out of, yeah, it is funny though. I do forget about that sometimes.
What was life like for you during that time? Like during when it was like the full lockdown?
Did you make a lot of music?
I made so much music. Yeah, we can probably talk about that too once we get into that. But yeah, I was pretty much making a lot of music. I knew that like I was starting to go into that. And the funny thing is that I actually didn't, I've talked to a few people about this too, but I actually didn't want to teach at all after that. Like I was pretty set on just wanting to start my life in the music industry and starting to move on and away from band. I was kind of like, I feel like 2019 was a great place to end drum corps wise, like on the field, like that was it. And Pulse 2020, like the way that season felt, the way it ended, like even though it was short, I still felt quite fulfilled. And I think a lot of the members of that ensemble could say the same thing. We felt very fulfilled by it. At the end, like we gave our all in that last run and we gave our all that entire season, which is kind of why I think a lot of those vets that could have come back for 22 didn't, you know? And so like most of us were just kind of like, yeah, like I feel good about that. Like I'm cool with moving on. So most of quarantine was just like a lot of that. Tons of making music, tons of just exploring and just practicing. And
Were you still going to school at UCLA?
Yeah, I was also just finishing school. So trying to do classical percussion in quarantine was also really tough at the time because my professors actually were able to rent us out all instruments. Like I had a marimba in my little apartment in LA just so we can do mallet lessons and things like that. And
the neighbors must have loved you.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything. So, yeah.
Did you get your degree?
I did. I finished it out.
What's your degree in?
My degree is in classical percussion performance.
That's awesome.
And then I also got a minor in music industry as well. So I was taking classes for that as well. That was one of the things where I was like, I really want to do that thing. I really want to do the minor. But I think like also doing classical percussion, like I kind of switched more my focus to kind of maxing that out and doing more just like classical style, something that I wasn't quite used to actually at the time. Even though I was still doing it in school, I was always kind of overplaying and way too loud for like a concert setting and things, kind of natural. But really practicing to like kind of work on my classical touch and things like that also really helped me to kind of open my eyes in the marching world in the sense of like having that sort of orchestral understanding going back into it afterwards. So going into 22, I felt like I learned so much over like quarantine and COVID, just kind of like practicing like tons of classical percussion, tons of excerpts, tons of lessons, going through books, playing the Mitch Peters stuff, things like that.
So 21, you do the virtual Blue Devils.
Yes.
And then did you get invited to be on staff in 22?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And I remember it was actually after the 21 season too, because I remember thinking, and this was kind of like, I've had this conversation with a few people too, but at the time, like a part of my experience at the Blue Devils when I was marching 2018, 2019, I noticed too that because the only person on quad staff at the time was just Rudy.
Yeah.
Rudy Garcia. So, and he's just a man who can he can kind of just be the front man. He will lead the battery. He will do all those things as well as be the quad tech too. And I think I was watching him and kind of watching him transition into more of a bigger role and kind of take on this sort of ultra figure now that's kind of leading the Blue Devils in the direction of it, even currently, And so I think at the time too, though, I started to notice that just meant we had just a little less in front of us at the time. And it was super warranted. It's totally fine. That's the deal. And also we knew that they trusted us to be able to work on those things. So I was able to kind of help us. I remember talking with Nick a lot and being hey, can you help out with some other quad stuff like that too? So I remember talking with Rudy as well as Scott after the 21 virtual experience as well. And just being hey, I feel there's a certain little gap happening. Just a little one, just I think, doesn't even have to be me sort of deal. I was I'm not exactly saying it has to be me, but there is I think just one more person will complete that sort of package, and kind of helping because you have the sort of battery manager / quad tech, and then just having one more person to devote, especially since the snares had so many people. Bases always had Nick Parsons. And so going into 22 as well, when Scott gave me the call, I knew that, they really wanted to kind of bring on, knowing that they were going to have a rookie battery, kind of having some more recent veteranship to kind of help them with the transition as well. So, I mean, in 21, they also hired Brandon, and then we also hired Grayson.
Well, I think I heard Scott say one of those things the 22 line, they needed people to teach them how to be a Blue Devil. Mm-hmm. So you and was it Brandon on our staff? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, you guys were the guys for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a small deal.
Yeah.
That is a big deal. Okay, these other reasons that we're giving, right? The recency of when you march and stuff like that. All that being said, there's been a lot of really amazing tenor players that have gone through Blue Devils.
Yeah.
But you are on staff.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about that?
Oh, constantly. I do constantly think about it. It was one of those things throughout that whole summer as well. I wasn't sure, and I kind of had this sense, I guess you could call it imposter syndrome, right? Just not quite, I kind of would think just that's insane. Me over the Chris Drummers, the Scott Nelsons, the Steven Takedas, all those people. And just being I would constantly ask myself that summer, why is it me? But I also think throughout that summer, as I started to develop my voice as an instructor and start to find my role in the family, in the organization, I very soon quickly learned that what I bring as me is different, and also complements the staff. And I was just actually talking about this with Rudy in Saudi Arabia too. The two of us are sort of dynamic in a sense, very much complements one to the other. And now it's kind of one of those things, I think in hindsight, I can now see more of I feel I belong a lot more now. Sure. And at the time I was questioning a lot, but I think it definitely took a lot of reflection, a lot of thinking, and just being and then also eventually just kind of accepting and being that's I know that honestly, if I'm doing what I value best and bringing that to the table, that's all anyone can ever ask,
I remember seeing you early that season, when you guys were still in California and going to rehearsals and stuff like that. And it was funny because it's you would see Rudy or Ben or Scott, Scott sort of roaming the sidelines, Ben sitting up top or Rudy sitting up top. And then you and Brandon basically just waiting until the rep's over and then running out and making a comment and stuff like that. And there wasn't any overlap. There wasn't any redundancy as far as everybody was filling the spots that needed to be filled with regards to like making the job comprehensive, you know. That was really fun to see.
Yeah, I love being in the trenches, man. That's something too where I think that's one of the things that like a lot of people I work with like kind of do, and like I love feeding off of that energy of just like just being like with them in the reps and being able to see, and also helping them to see and making sure that, you know, we're not leaving any blind spots. Like a lot of the times too is just like, it's not just me telling them like what's good, what's bad, but it's me being like, did you hear the same things I heard? You know, and like kind of like verification, and for them to know the same thing as well. Like for them to ask me like, do you hear that? Like, is that the same thing? And so like, I think that's one of those things. It was just it's super fun to just kind of like, I've kind of really enjoyed teaching and just like really just getting in there. So like I'll be doing that at Chino Hills, at Pulse, like just a part of like just my teaching style is just really like not so much just like always assessing, but really just kind of like being right there with the members in the action, showing that like I'm just as involved as they are.
Yeah.
Know?
And at the same time as you're starting to teach drum corps, you're still aging out from WGI.
Yeah.
You're going into that 22 season. Yeah.
Yeah. That also felt pretty surreal.
And you had said during COVID, you had thought maybe.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it's one of those things where, and this is actually another funny story, because I did tell people, you know, like I'm not really going to teach, but if I were to teach, if I were to teach a high school, I'd probably do Chino Hills. But like, you know, and then eventually got asked. And then I was like, you know, I wouldn't really teach drum corps unless it was like the home team, you know? And then eventually, you know, the same thing and the trifecta. So like it was one of those things where like as those opportunities came about, I felt like that's kind of like, I felt like not like an obligation, not in a negative way, but sort of like for my own fulfillment of like the full circleness of it all. Yeah. Like I felt like that would be like giving back to all those organizations that I've always looked up to and I've always cared about, and then have given so much to now, you know.
That 22 Pulse line was special.
Yes.
Yes, it was.
Yes.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was one of those like from the outside. Let's just talk about like the fandom was like, okay, well, who's taking second? You know, because it was just like so clean all year long, just going. What was that year like? Basically, closing the chapter that way for you.
Honestly, like, and I've told this to a few people, but that season felt like a fairy tale to me. Like it felt like the perfect ending to like my culmination, like in this activity. And I think because what I kind of started to say earlier too was like I started to finally figure myself out as like a leader and finding that balance. So I knew the things that still could have been better after 20, like going into 22, especially in the quad line. And I knew all those things. So something that I tried differently in 22 from the get-go, as soon as we set the line, I wanted to make sure that, you know, we had the 4 guys that I knew had like the work ethic and things like that too. But once we had that line set, literally the day of setting the line, I sat us all down and was like, here were the things that went wrong in the past. And then people were like, yeah, for sure. Like, you know, like we're not going to do that. And I'm like, yes, but I'm saying that more as a way for us to officially set the standard from day one. And so that way, anytime we start to falter from that, I'm going to call us out on it, you know? And so like kind of laying down the rules, the guidelines and the standard, just setting the precedence from the very, very beginning, meaning that anytime we started to deviate away from that, I could call us out on it. And also like as the season went on, like I was trying different things as a leader. Like each week I kind of gave us like a weekly goal, like for the weekend, and being like, did we meet that goal? If we didn't meet that goal, why not? You know, and kind of asking ourselves those questions and really leaving it up to open discussion and making sure that everyone felt heard. And then also like if someone was struggling, like not kind of being like, I wasn't the type of leader that season to kind of be like, just figure it out, man. Like you'll be good. It was more like, well, let's talk about it. You know, let's see what those problems are.
That's really interesting. Something I want to ask about that is that an Elijah personality thing? Because you talked about what you just described. You also talked about sort of a version of that as an instructor, right? Of sort of being there with them. is that an Elijah thing, or was that a little bit of like we just came out of COVID, we all had to be separate from each other and we really need to be together now? Or is it both?
I think it had to be both. I think like for me, like there was just kind of like my own personal growth. And it was one of those things like I didn't know if it was going to work. I was just trying it, you know? So like I was just trying to like see and assess and take each weekend like as it came. And so like, and also like something that, and I think that kind of did for sure, it was probably a part of COVID, you know, for sure. Just being back, I was super antsy. I think we were all very excited and we were all super down and excited, and really feeding off of that energy and using it in a charged state to kind of just like really hit the ground running from the beginning. So really just kind of setting checkpoints and like those things, like I felt a lot more organized as a leader and just being like, okay, like we should know these things by this point, you know, we should try and aim for like trying to focus on these things, probably roughly that area, but we'll see when the time comes. There might be setbacks, who knows, but really taking those things like just kind of like at face point and just seeing like kind of just problem solving it and also like working as a team. And so I think something as well that like, and I think these are like some of the things that I think kind of I started to realize defined me as like a leader in this activity and also just as an instructor as well, is kind of like priding myself on the aspect of transparency and just really being able to communicate fully about the good and the bad of whatever. And so being like, okay, so like that's, and I think most students kind of appreciate that. And also like not coming from an aggressive state as well, coming from a rather chill and calm state and being able to talk with them and being like, okay, so like, yes, okay, so let's talk about what's good. Clearly that's good. Those reps were rocking. These parts were not. This rehearsal was really good. But like if we had to pick, what wasn't? And then also just being like, or even if a rehearsal is real bad, sometimes it's real rough. Just being like, instead of getting angry, learning how to kind of calm myself down, not being so stressed out about it, trying to attack it from a more neutral point of view and seeing like, well, and just asking the question like, well, what's the answers? What are solutions? Instead of just saying there's problems, you know, instead of just being like, yeah, this is a thing, that's a thing. But it's more like, okay, so like, how do we fix that? How do we fix the next thing? Do you have any ideas? Can we all come up with ideas and things like that? And just trying to be able to work together. And I think also like, that's also, at least personally, that's served great benefits as an instructor too, being able to talk with students in that sense, being like, so today was not great, but why do we think that wasn't great? What do you guys think? Like, do you guys think you guys were trying hard enough? Or like asking all sorts of hypothetical questions and trying to get them to like, trying to help them to be able to problem solve as well. And especially because, you know, at the top level, it starts to become less about the hands and more about the energy and mental game, managing the mindset and things like that, getting everybody on the same page of unification. And I have some funny stories about 22 because I definitely tried as many aspects as I could try about trying to uniform the mindset, you know?
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. You were a performer for a lot of seasons.
Yeah.
At the end, did you ever find yourself at any point getting burned out? And I say that because in my era when I marched, and I don't know if I could speak for George. George marched a lot of years. Towards the end of mine, I know for sure I was burned out to the point where I actually didn't march my last year.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of started to feel that way right around when COVID happened, which is why like I remember when I was saying kind of like, I don't think I'm going to teach. I actually kind of thought I was done. I didn't think I was going to do 22. And just because like I felt like the world forced me to like kind of like close that chapter, and it did feel like a conclusion. It just kind of felt like that. Maybe it wasn't necessarily a burnout in a sense where I was tired of it. It was more like I feel fulfilled. I feel like I've done all I can do. At the moment, of course, I didn't know anything yet. You know, in hindsight, now I can look back and be like, there was definitely way more to give. But I think the burnout thing didn't quite hit me the same way as I know it happens for other people, but also like, you know, everyone's like situations are different. Everyone experiences a summer differently. Everyone takes that in differently. So I think like you know, it kind of depends on the person and depends on the season. So like, I don't think either one is warranted or not, you know?